Right, today I've come to the Devil's Quoits in Oxfordshire, and the Devil's Quoits are an interesting site because it's a largely reconstructed site. The stones you can see all around me, none of them were above the ground 60 years ago, except for one. The entire site was completely flat and levelled and utterly forgotten about. In 1940, the Royal Air Force were trying to build an airbase here, and they had completely flattened the ground for a runway. In the 1960s and 70s, gravel was being dug for here, rock was being quarried here, and there is right now a landfill site just the other side of the camera. All of these things mean that this site was almost completely destroyed, but it was saved. And in 2002, people got together to reconstruct the site to how it would have looked in around 50 AD, the coming of the Romans. And there's two big reasons for that. One, it's a bit easier because you don't have to get the original appearance of the stones and you don't have to build as high or as deep. But the second reason is for conservation purposes. If you dug the ditches that surround the site down to their original depth, you would be digging out all of the deposits and the archaeological evidence from the Bronze Age to the Roman period. And we know by the time the Romans came, this site was abandoned. No one was doing anything here. But before that, in the Bronze Age, people were coming here regularly, and it's important to preserve those deposits. Restoration doesn't happen very often with historical sites. The current trend is for conservation. You find the site in its current state and you keep it that way for as long as you can. You know, once serious conservators have taken over, they can keep a site roughly the same for hundreds, if not thousands of years, provided they get continual funding. Reconstruction and restoration isn't as common unless there is relatively good reason to do so, because in many ways you're not really putting it back to how it was, you're putting it back to how we think it was, and in doing so you may destroy evidence, you may be doing it incorrectly, you might be putting it back the way you think it should be and you've got it completely wrong. A simple example of this, Shakespeare's Head at his tomb, there's a marble bust of him and it has been polished white because 18th century people thought that's what it was supposed to look like, but originally it was painted to look like how Shakespeare looked. So a lot of the fine detail in his appearance is gone forever. And the same thing can be done by accident by the restorers, and in good faith they can ruin something, and then we are all poorer for it. This site, however, was so completely obliterated by all the various things that people wanted to do to it in the 20th century that when they came to putting it back together, it was probably a better idea because there was nothing to conserve. Other than the earth deposits, which, as I said, haven't been touched, there was no evidence here. All the stones were buried, the site was flattened. Why not put it back? When it was an active Neolithic site, these pits would have been 4 meters deep, so I'm standing in it. You wouldn't be able to see me, you wouldn't be able to see anyone standing on my shoulders, but you can see me right now. This entranceway would have been filled with fires to close off the entrance and guard the site, and in between all the stones there would have been carcasses laid down. At least carcasses were buried between them for reasons we're not sure of. It could have been a sacrifice, it could have been a meal, but that's where they were put. Some have suggested that this was a site on a pilgrimage route that would take you throughout the Thames Valley. Other henges in Oxfordshire are at the Windrush River, at Oxford and at Dorchester, and seem to be following the Thames. But at the same time, it's entirely possible that communities just lived near the Thames. The Thames area would have been quite marshy, but it was beginning to be cleared in the Bronze Age and late Neolithic period, so it's possible that it was just a community space in that regard and doesn't need to have had any greater cultural significance beyond the local community. Estimates on how long it would have taken to build: 100 men could have built the whole site in about 3 to 6 weeks, if that was all that they did. So it's probable that it happened over a single generation, and probably only a couple of years at the most. For agricultural societies to have 100 men who had the free time to do that, it's relatively plausible that it was a single generation. The stones aren't that big. One of the things that's bizarre to me now is that all these ditches, because the soil here is sand and gravel, it's perfect for rabbits, and there's just hundreds of warrens all around. Whoever built this in the Neolithic period would have had a nightmare of a time keeping them all down. Although, on the other hand, dinner, lots of free food trying to burrow into your religious site. As Neolithic henges go, it's nowhere near the largest. It's smaller than Avebury, it's smaller than Stonehenge, but it is impressive to be in this area. There aren't many around here. It's also nice, as it has been reconstructed, we can see it similar to how it would have appeared 2,000 years ago. And that's a very pleasant thing to witness. While it is lovely to see a reconstructed site, the name the Devil's Quoits comes from the time when this whole site had a single standing stone above the ground and half-buried boulders and great big ditches all the way around them, which created the legend that a poor beggar about to die had a game for his soul with the devil, and they chose to play quoits, which is the game where you throw hoops at a stone or a marker post to try and get as close as you can, and the devil cheats by throwing huge boulders, meaning the man can't get it. In some legends, the man goes to hell for playing a game for his soul. In other legends, angels claim him because the devil cheated, and that isn't fair. But it's interesting now that it's retained that name, the Devil's Quoits, despite the fact if you came here, you'd have no idea why. No idea. There's no remnant of anything that looks like quoits anymore.